Welcome to Stand. I'm your host, Kelly Tshibaka, and this is where we help make courage contagious. I'm joined today by my amazing co-host and husband, Nikki Tshibaka, and we have an outstanding episode for you. You can catch all of our episodes on our website, standshow.org. Become one of our subscribers, our standouts, and join us on social media. Today, we are excited to have the Attorney General of the state of Alaska, Treg Taylor, join us. Treg, thank you so much for joining us on our show. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Nikki, for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
Nothing going on in the state of Alaska right now. So it's an amazing time to be in the position, I find myself in a fortunate position to be in a position that I can help the state of Alaska. And so it's a great time to be the Attorney General.
We know that you are joining us from Juneau today, so we appreciate you calling in. Tell us a little bit about your background story and how you came to become our Attorney General.
Yeah, no, as a kid growing up, ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a fighter. That was my goal. That was my dream. And I worked really hard for that, actually. And I grew up primarily in a single parent home. My mother was raising 4 kids and teaching full time. And so I had a lot of free time on my hand. I could have made a lot of different decisions, but I had that goal that I wanted to go to the United States Air Force Academy and be a fighter pilot. And so that kept me out of trouble for the most part. I think that goal was key, I think, in my ability to move forward and not fall for some of the pitfalls that certainly were around me. And it led me to want to be excellent in academics and to get the grades that I could be accepted to the Air Force Academy. And so I was living the dream, and lo and behold, I get accepted to the Air Force Academy. And it was one of the best days of my life. I love the academy. I spent 2 years at the academy before. They had a deal sort of with churches that if you're going to serve a mission, they wanted you to wait until after your second year, because your first year is you're not even human. They beat on you. It's not great. It's not it's fun to look back on, was not fun to go through. And then your second year is your hardest academically. So they wanted you to get through those 2 years before you left for mission. So I applied for a mission at the end of the 2 years and was sent to the Canary Islands, which is off the coast of Morocco and African coast. And spent 2 years there and reapplied to get back. You have to reapply while you're on your mission because that's the timelines for the academy, but reapplied and got back in, and they sent me a letter. And I apologize ahead of time. I had a hard time getting through this story, but sent me a letter. All I had to do, sign my name, send it back in, and I was going to be a junior at the United States Air Force Academy. I was living my dream. I was pilot qualified physically, and one of the very few pilot qualified physically in my class, because the DoD had come down and said, hey, if you've had LASIX, you're not going to fly for the Air Force. And of course, half my classmates had LASIX just to fly. And so, but I got that paper and I had the hardest time trying to sign that. I tried to sign that thing so hard for about 2 weeks. And I felt bad because here I am. I'm a missionary. I'm supposed to be serving the people of the Canary Islands, and I can't get my mind off of this paper that I would love to sign. And so I did all the tricks, like the positives and negatives for returning. Actually, the only positive I could think of not returning is I could marry a girl I've been dating for many years, right? And that was the only thing I could put in a positive. And despite all that, after about two weeks of not being able to sleep, not being able to focus, I'd had enough. And I finally dropped to my knees and really flippantly, and I feel bad about it now, but really flippantly, I said, fine, I'll do what you want me to do. And I knew exactly what I was supposed to do at that time. And so it really changed the course of my life. And I apologize again, but literally one of the biggest decisions of my life. And I'm so glad that I listened. Because I've been able to do so much good as an attorney. And oddly enough, I got back from my mission. I enrolled at college, and I met my wife the first week, not the girl I've been dating for several years. So God has a plan, and that's what I learned. And I know that if I follow that plan, I'm going to be in the right place to do the right things. And so I feel very fortunate to be in this position. Like that was part of his plan for me. And my legal career, I started out in litigation. I did 5 years of litigation in Anchorage. We came up. My wife's from Anchorage, so we came up right after law school, and so I started that 5 years of litigation at a firm called Lewis and Moran, Garrity and Zobel. Michael Garrity, who happened to be an attorney general before me, was my supervisor. And then I decided I'd go in-house because I really wanted to be part of a team. I grew up playing team sports. I wanted to help grow a business, help a business solve problems instead of just kind of be a hired hitman. And so I went over to McKinley Capital. That was Bob Gillum's shop, and he was a great boss, a great mentor, and spent 5 years there before going over to SRC in the oil and gas division, because I knew if I was going to stay in Alaska and make law career, I'd eventually have to get into the oil and gas and energy arena. And so it was there that the governor reached out and asked me if I'd apply for the position of the attorney general. And so I did. It wasn't something that I'd ever really thought of before. I knew, Mike had gone on to become the attorney general, so I kind of had that relationship with the position. And then when it came down to it, I did not get the attorney general spot. I remember thinking, okay, and they offered me to be the deputy over the civil division. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this to the deputy over the civil division. I'm not going to do this trying to, work my way into the attorney general spot. So that's what I did. I accepted the position as deputy attorney general, and then 2 years later, I ended up being in this position as attorney general. And I feel very fortunate because I've been an attorney general 4 years, almost corresponding to the Biden administration, which has been a whirlwind, to say the least. So that's how I ended up where I am, and glad to make Alaska my home. I know when we were thinking about where we wanted to go after law school, Jody was the first thing she said to me was anywhere but Alaska. It's like, what? We'd come up and work in the summers. I'd fallen in love with the state, and she's like, well, I've lived there my whole life. I want to see something different. But again, through divine intervention, we came to realize that Alaska is where we were supposed to be. That's where we were supposed to raise our family, our 6 children, and it's been a great blessing to be here in the state.
It's an amazing story, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency, because it's those pivotal decisions in our lives that are the most emotional and profound and transformational. And we could hear that in your voice, but also in the story itself, just the weight of that. I have fond memories of the Canary Islands. I traveled there as a child and vacationed there with my parents, and it's a beautiful place. So awesome to hear that you're on mission over there. I'd like to.
When I made that decision, not sign and to go elsewhere, that it was like a massive weight lifted off my shoulder, and it was really cool because that afternoon, the Spanish Air Force, they have a base there on the Canary Islands, but I never saw any of the aircraft fly. They're always grounded. And that afternoon, I kid you not, 2 MiGs took off from that base and right over us as we were working, and that had that return of that feeling where I had made the right decision. That burden had been lifted from me, and it turned out there was somebody had bought a Russian sub, and we're going to use it as a tourist attraction, but didn't bother to tell the governor of Spain that they were going to bring that sub into their port. So that's why those 2 MiGs scrambled. So really happenstance, but another just a reaffirmation that I was doing what God wanted to do.
That's incredible, and so thankful for your service. And wow, it's one of those, I call it the pressure cooker moments where you just feel there's this almost like holy discomfort where you're just like, something's not quite right. I've got to make a decision either way. And then once you make it and it's the right decision, that pressure just kind of fizzles, and you just feel this complete peace, and you're headed in the right direction. So that's amazing. Wow.
We're coming close up to a break, but Treg, I would like for you to tee up for us what some of your greatest wins are as Attorney General. What have you taken the most satisfaction in?
Yeah, and if we tee those up, maybe you can list a few of them, and we can, on the other side of the break, we can go deeper into them.
Let's talk about COVID litigation. Let's talk about saving the cruise ship season. Statehood defense has been a fabulous thing that we've done. And then obviously we've had that recent litigation over the correspondence schools. So those are some big ones that I'm proud of, I think, because, and mostly because of the amount of people that are affected for good in getting those points. And so, yeah, I'd love to talk more about those.
That'd be great. So we're coming up on this break, so stay with us on the other side. I think it's really important. A lot of people don't really keep up with how much the law and litigation and even just how much a strong letter from an attorney general can affect the course of our daily lives. And if you've never heard of Treg Taylor before, he is very much all up in your business, defending and advocating and protecting us as Alaskans, and even signing on to litigation across the United States that affects what's happening in other states. And so we definitely want to tune in and hear about what you're doing, Treg, and find out all that's going on, because the Attorney General has a huge impact on the rights, the civil rights, and even our pocketbooks here in Alaska and across the United States. So this is Stand. You're with Kelly and Nikki Tshibaka on Stand. We're at standshow.org. We're with Treg Taylor, the Attorney General for the state of Alaska, and he has been for several years. I had the honor of working with him when I was Commissioner for Administration in the Governor's Cabinet. We'll pick up just on the other side of the break. Stand by. The Emerald is Alaska's first multi-level senior activity program made specifically for elder Alaskans and those with physical disabilities. It's located in Midtown Anchorage, and the facility offers unprecedented views of downtown Anchorage and the inlet from a newly renovated building. The goal is to encourage a spirit of independence and foster community integration. Experience a new senior care program built by Alaskans for Alaskans. Call Julie today at 907-830-8212.
We are back on Stand with General Taylor, Attorney General Treg Taylor, State Attorney General for the state of Alaska. Such an honor to have him on here with us on Stand. General Taylor, on the previous segment, you had just teed up for us some of the incredible work that you and your staff have been doing in the Attorney General's office on behalf of the people of Alaska. You referenced some of the COVID litigation. You referenced some of the wins as it relates to the cruise ships issues, and you've also talked about what is a huge issue right now related to correspondence schools, which is something of great import for many Alaskans, because we all know that education is a big issue for all of us right now. So could you unpack each of those things and what you've been doing in those areas so that more Alaskans can hear about the incredible work your office has been doing?
Yeah, no, and I'll kind of go in order. I've been the Attorney General for 4 years, and as I said in the previous segment, it seemed to have just overlapped directly with the Biden administration, which gave us plenty to do here, including defend against some of the COVID mandates that they were pushing out. And so we entered 5 major COVID mandate pieces of litigation. Of course, it wasn't Alaska going alone. One of the great parts about being the Attorney General during that time is I got to know my counterparts in the other states really well and worked really well with each other, and had sort of a division of labor, because there's stuff coming out so fast that it was really easy to lose track of something or not notice something. And so I have 26 sets of eyes, 26 Attorney General with their eyes on it. It really helped us convert the situation. So the CMS mandate, which was basically mandating the vaccine for all healthcare workers, successful in getting that thrown out, which I think is huge. And then OSHA, that was another big piece of litigation, because they wanted to mandate any employer that had over 100 employees, that they were mandating that employer force all those employees to get the vaccine. And we were successful in that litigation. There was one that was directed at federal contractors. And so if you had no matter if you're just a mom and pop shop that had a federal contract, any federal contractor would have to mandate that all of their employees get the vaccine. And so again, working with other states, we were successful in getting that thrown out. And then the last one, Head Start, they're forcing everybody, teachers, students, Head Start program, to get the vaccine, and we successfully got that in toss number one. We lost on it. We knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but we thought it was a worthy battle. and that was the vaccine requirement for all the military personnel. And that's because clearly the president has a lot of direct authority over military personnel. And so we knew that one was an uphill battle, and we fought that one. We lost in the courts. But it had the desired effect because Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin rescinded that mandate soon after that litigation. We managed to put it out there in the media and sort of tried it in the American people's minds as well as the courts. And so that was the COVID litigation. So I think we saved a lot of people in this country from being required or forced to get the COVID shot or lose their jobs, which should never, ever, ever occur. And hopefully will never occur again. Hopefully we as a nation have learned that lesson.
Yeah, Treg, it reminds me of a phrase that Nikki and I will say to each other often, and I just want to remind our audience of it, that some causes are so worthy that it is noble even to fail in their pursuit. And so as you were just saying, even though you knew it probably didn't have legal cause to be able to order the commander-in-chief to not administer the COVID shot on the troops, by pursuing that legal civil right for our men and women in service, we put so much social pressure on the Secretary of Defense that they were able to rescind it anyway. You knew you were probably going into a losing battle legally, but you won it in the court of public opinion, and therefore we were able to protect a civil right freedom for the men and women in uniform. And I appreciate that because we know that we're not going to win every battle, but it's still noble to pursue some of these battles anyway. And that's what it means to take a stand. I appreciate that. You mentioned one on the other side of the break as well, which was about the cruise industry, which has such huge consequences for Alaska. What one was that about?
So that one was basically through the COVID mandate for requirements for vaccine, cruise ships, ports of entry, all the different requirements basically were going to shut the cruise industry. There's sort of a double whammy at this time in that. Not only that, but for the Alaska cruise season, all of the Canadian ports were closed, and so that under law, they'd have to stop at these foreign ports in order to make the voyage to Alaska. And so it was twofold on that fight. We joined forces with Florida, which obviously has a big concern about cruise ship stoppage. And so we joined forces with Ashley Moody down in Florida, who's now the senator representing Florida. And we were successful in that litigation. And then we worked very closely with both of our congressional delegations to get waivers for that requirements of those acts that prevented cruise ships from coming directly from the Seattle ports to Alaska without stopping in the ports. And so that was a big win because, the Southeast, they don't have the timber industry that they used to have. And a lot of these small towns, a lot of these small businesses, small restaurants, they live and die by the cruise industry. And having that disrupted for multiple years in a row would have had devastating effects. I've already seen, I'm sitting in Juneau in my office Juneau, I can look at restaurants that no longer exist just because of the 1 year that they were in it, and pretty expensive.
Wow.
There's other litigation I could talk about too. That the statehood defense stuff's really kind of interesting. It was the meat and potatoes of sort of Alaska's response to all the Biden executive orders and mandates directed in Alaska. If you'd like to do that.
Yeah, please unpack that.
Yeah, so we knew right away that Alaska was going to be a target of the Biden administration. But he made it. He did what he said he was going to do during this campaign. So we knew Alaska was going to be a target. So we came up with the idea of the statehood defense fund. We went to the legislature for additional funding to help that fight because we knew the battle was coming. And we basically formed a group as Commissioner of DNR, Commissioner of Fish and Game, and Commissioner of DEC and myself. We met every week. We continue to meet every week on these issues to try to figure out what battles are coming, how to prepare for them, what science do we need Fish and Game to do or DEC to do in order to be able to win, be ultimately successful in these legal battles. And again, because of that extra funding that the legislature gave us to take that on, we've been very successful And we currently have over 80 lawsuits against the federal government. And the basis of statehood defense is, hey, Alaskans should decide the destiny of Alaska, right? Not a federal bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. And so this is all about making sure the feds respected the promises they made in Alaska statehood and allow Alaska to determine its future. And so that's sort of what statehood defense, some of our big wins, it might not seem like a big deal to most people that aren't even know, but like the polar bear incident on Cape. If that had gone awry, we'd literally have had to stop production on the North Slope because of polar bear critical habitat. We were successful in that. We were able to preserve and have enough capacity for that operation on the North Slope to continue, and also to allow for Willow to go in. Because again, if that had gone a different way, Willow would never have been allowed to move. We kept commercial Chinook pushing going on in the southeast Alaska. We took on some of the environmental groups that wanted to shut that down in the federal government. And then we have the critical habitat for ice seals. There's millions and millions of ice seals. It's a healthy population. But what the Biden administration was doing with all this critical habitat and endangered species listings is they were taking the science and they were modeling it out 100 years. So they're thinking 100 years, could ice seals be endangered? And of course, using their modeling and their logic and they came up with the fact, oh yeah, in 100 years they're going to be a species that's almost extinct. And so we fought that. And if you look at the designation for critical habitat does, it basically shuts down any type of commercial use of those waters or of the land that encompasses that critical habitat. And what's really unfair is that it encompassed like the entire coast of Alaska. Now, if you look at critical habitat on the East Coast, different story, right? Because again, Alaska is an easy target. So critical habitat for species like the Atlantic right whale, there are little tiny pockets of critical habitat that allow still commercial activity to continue to go on around it. But in Alaska, they were using that as a weapon. They were trying to weaponize critical habitat and prevent us from doing any additional mining in that critical habitat, any of the offshore drilling that may occur in the future. And so that was a big win for the state as well.
They were doing the same thing with how they were expanding definition of clean water, and anything that was essentially defined as a puddle became protected waters. And just these really expansive regulations. You were talking about it. The governor was talking about it. Senator Sullivan was talking about it, about how expansive they made the regulatory authority to just really shut down and target everything in Alaska, to just turn us into a national park. It was their 30 by 30 agenda to have 30% of the United States water and land shut down by 2030, and the main place they were targeting was here. So, you were on full defense. It's you got to be that fighter pilot, but from the courtroom, for the state of Alaska.
Managing 80 pieces of litigation is no easy task. Luckily, I've got a great cohort of attorneys. A lot of people don't realize we do both. The criminal prosecution side, Alaska is kind of unique. We do all criminal prosecution, at least all felonies. Some of the municipalities may do some of the misdemeanors, but then the other half of the Department of Law does all the civil stuff. So all this defensive statement that went on was our folks, and with the additional funds from the legislature, we were able to bring in key outside counsel with the expertise to set some of these cases up for U.S. Supreme Court, and I still think that some of these lawsuits, we're still hoping some of these lawsuits get served in front of the U.S. Supreme Court being heard, because we desperately need to do that.
It would be good if they do, because I think we need the legal precedent to be able to stand on for 10th Amendment purposes for states' rights, so that we are able to draw that line in the sand. We're up on a break, so let's take the break, audience, and we'll come back with Treg Taylor on the other side. And Attorney General Taylor, we want to talk to you about education. And we know that Trump is looking to disband, or will be disbanding. I'm sure that there will be some legal challenges to that, to the Department of Education. We want to talk about how that's going to affect Alaska and some of the challenges that we've faced here in Alaska to homeschooling and private education and funding for education. We want to get all your thoughts on that on the other side of the break. So stand by. We'll be right back after this. You're on Stand with Kelly Nikki Tshibaka. At Holquist Homes, they believe in providing the highest level of quality at the lowest possible price. Over 40 years and 4,000 homes later, value and pride continue to be the core of their philosophy while building for Alaskan families. They currently have a variety of new developments in South Anchorage, Upper and Lower Hillside, and Eagle River. At Holquist Homes, they value the satisfaction of their buyers by building homes that their buyers are proud to own. Holquist Homes. Welcome back to Stand with Kelly Nikki Tshibaka. We're with Attorney General Taylor. I'm totally starting with that. Over the break, the Attorney General told us that he has been awarded by the Anchorage Daily News as Worst Legislator of the Year because he's actually been doing things and making an impact, which I really appreciate, because when you take a stand, people are going to give you flack for it, and I think it's important to wear that as a badge of honor. So I'm very proud of you, Attorney General.
For being effective in the executive
Yes.
function that you have, so much so that
Yeah, when your adversaries give you a badge for it, it's something to wear with pride. So just hang that on your wall. I just want to.
It goes to the importance of being grounded, right? And always knowing what you stand for and what
That's
you
right.
value. Because man, there's so much pressure to do the wrong thing sometimes, or to ignore things, or to let things go. It's constant
That's right.
pressure, especially from our media.
Yeah. So I have people who care about me very much and who watch the hate that I get on social media on a daily basis from what people would call trolls. And they reach out to me with great concern regularly. And I tell them that I don't care, because if you're effective, then you're going to get more comments against you. But if you're ineffective, then nobody is going to comment at all. So I actually use it as a measure of how effective I'm being at influencing and affecting things. And that's what I take your ADN badge as being. If you weren't doing anything, you wouldn't be getting any heat. So
it's good for people to be in a position where people are coming against you when you're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
At least like your conscience is clear.
That's
and
right.
When you have a clear conscience, all of that noise just doesn't matter, because you know that you're on the right track.
So you've really taken a stand on things like parental rights and on education here in Alaska. For those who aren't caught up, we do have a major education problem. Many times we're rated 51st in the nation of 50 states as far as our education quality. When I grew up here in Anchorage, we were around the top 20. And so it's been, I would say, maybe an intentional decline in the last several decades in order to drop from where we were to where we are. So, General Taylor, I wanted to ask you, what have you been doing to address this? What's your take on Trump's effort to abolish or diminish the Department of Education? He's sending some of those functions over to other departments. How will that affect us? And then Nikki and I have been particularly concerned recently about the efforts in the court system and in the legislature to, well, I would just say create a monopoly of public school funding only in Alaska and stop all funding for homeschool efforts, private schools. I think many of us participate in the stipend funding from the state to help our kids in extracurricular activities. I just wanted to kind of toss the ball to you and see what's your take on this as our head attorney in the state to protect education and school choice and parental rights for Alaskans.
Yeah, no, one of the blessings of COVID was the spotlight on our education system.
That's right.
Without COVID, we probably wouldn't have this uprising that we see as far as people demanding results from their education system, demanding choices. And, I obviously, I've got 6 kids, so I constantly worry about what kind of education they're getting. And then, as a parent of 6 kids, you also know that each kid is so different. So one way of doing things isn't going to be best for each kid. Prime example, my oldest Quincy, she did a highly gifted program in the West. Now, she was likely the only conservative person in that entire program, and she took arrows constantly. But I knew, because I knew my daughter Quincy, I knew what she was made of, I knew her personality, I knew she could handle that, and that she could rise to the occasion, rise to it, right? And the occasion. And so some of my other children, I probably wouldn't put them in that position, right? Because I know them, and they're still growing, and they're still learning, and they're still developing sort of that backbone. And so it's really nice for a parent to be able to have educational choice. Like, where should I put? What is going to be the best to facilitate my kids' learning? And you mentioned it, the dreadful scores that Alaska gets, despite being one of the highest funded states out there, and so you want to protect what is working. And right now, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to address what we talked about with Trump and the Department of Education and his wanting to sort of do away with the Department of Education. I'm going to pick up and read to your audience what the U.S. Constitution has to say about education. It's not in the U.S. Constitution, right? Because it was clearly a matter for states. And
I was holding my breath. I was like, "What's he going to read?"
Yeah.
That I'm like, oh, maybe they've added something.
Our founders clearly wanted education to be controlled by the states, and
yeah,
in Amendment 10, right?
that's right.
Further said, hey, whatever powers are not reserved for themselves are reserved for the state. Education is a state issue.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes something like the Department of Education so dangerous is because it forces uniformity throughout the entire United States. Right now, we're seeing this on an economic side, right? We're seeing states explore with tax deductions or tax relief or implementing certain policies or deregulating. And we're seeing states competing for economic growth. And if there was an edict from Washington, D.C. that said you can't do that, then we wouldn't see this booming going around the United States. And people are voting with their feet, right? We're not European. We don't stay in the same place our entire lives. We're going to move where we can live the American dream the best, right? Because
Well, it's a good point. If none of your kids are the same, why would we assume any of the states are the same about education?
well, yeah, no, exactly. Well, Alaska could be exhibit one of it. What's good for a kid at Point Hope isn't necessarily good for a kid at West High School.
That's right.
And anytime you get, the federal government has so much control, not because of what they're allowed to do in the Constitution. They have control because they give out this free money, right? And you and I both know there's no such thing as free money. We pay for it, right? We're the taxpayer, so we're footing the bill, and that money comes with requirements. It comes with restrictions. It comes with duties and obligations. So, and that's how they've been able to control what goes on in the classroom so closely. And so I guess I'm all for, right? I'm all for taking that money and sending it to the states, allowing the states to use it and to have the ability of states to experiment with what works best, try different programs, try out different things, and then we as a state can look around who's doing it well. I mean, we saw that with reading, right? Florida reading scores used to be one of the worst. Alabama reading scores used to be one of the worst. Yet all of a sudden, in a few years, they're at near the top of the nation. It's like when you look at a state, you say, well, what are they doing, right? And why can't we do that? And so we saw a little bit of that legislation that was passed. Now, we didn't get everything they were doing in that legislation because we had compromise because that's how legislatures work. But we got some of that, and hopefully we'll see a corresponding increase in the ability for our children to read at that level, right? Because right now the numbers for Alaska are dismal, and that affects not only our future workforce, because we're going to need a future workforce. If we get half the projects that President Trump imagines or wishes for Alaska, we're going to need a workforce, and it also affects current workforce. I don't know how many times I've tried to recruit attorneys from out of state, friends, people I know do good work, and then you reach out and one of the first things they do is Google what our schools do, right? Because they want the best for their kids. And I've been told no many, many times because they look at our school performance and they say, there's no way I'm going to move my family to Alaska. So it affects future workforce, current workforce. So it's a big issue to grapple with. And we've seen that just increasing spending isn't the answer. That's what we've been doing, and our scores continue to degrade. So I think the Department of Education probably really never had a place under the Constitution, and so seeing that go away is not going to be it's going to be a good thing for the states. It'll give them more control, more ability to experiment, more ability to do things they know that their kids need. And so that's that in a nutshell. On the correspondence school, so we do have a pretty good system in Alaska. We have a correspondence school and allotments. We've got 22,000 kids that are sort of tailoring their educational needs. And the correspondence and allotment program is a public school. It's guided by a public school teacher. You get a public degree. It's a public school education, but it provides a lot of choice. And so, as many well know, if anybody in that program, they certainly know. But the NEA decided they didn't like that choice. They didn't like the parents being able to take their kids out of brick and mortar school that was here. They wanted to force those kids to be in a brick and mortar school. And so NEA hired Scott Kendall to go out and attack this authorizing statute for that. And so they did, and we defended that. And ultimately, we lost in the Superior Court, which was surprising. But we won in the Alaska Supreme Court, where we were able to say that statute is constitutional, because they were trying to get the whole program. Now they've come back since then, right? They've come back and sued based upon on what we call an as-applied challenge. So as school districts implement this correspondence school and allotment program per statute, as they implement it, they might be implementing it, according to Scott Kendall and the NEA, in a way that violates the Constitution. So we're getting ready to defend that. Obviously, that's ongoing litigation that barely started. They brought in 4 school districts, and so we're going to be defending school districts' right to be as nimble and as open as they can be in that program. Because again, the more choices you have, the better off that kid's going to be. And so we'll see what happens over the next. It'll probably be a pretty slow moving litigation, because they've subpoenaed they're asking for all these documents, and so it's going to be a pretty document intensive fight. But hopefully, at the end of the day, we can preserve that program for the 22,000 kids that are using it. We'll see what the courts say. But again, fight worthy to be a part of.
That's amazing. Wow. I just listening to all of that, it just reminds me, when you're in a fight like that and you know that you're right, it makes all of the difference, because really the folks on the other side of this, Kendall and the NEA, it's more about power and money on their side. And the fight that the Dunleavy administration and you and your office are doing is for the kids and their futures. And so hopefully the court will get it right at the Superior Court level this time, at least on this particular issue, and you won't have to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Want to wrap us up, sweetheart?
Yeah, I appreciate you taking up the fight. You think about the students involved, and they're a lot of the kids who have learning disabilities, special needs. They don't have all their needs met in the brick and mortar school, or a lot of times also the kids who need accommodations. They're the ones who are competing in our sports programs or at the Olympic level, and they're the ones who are out of state or, our best students in a lot of ways, and they can't show up Monday through Friday at a public school. And so they're needing that accommodation, and we want to support students at the different ends of the learning spectrum in these accommodations. And Alaska's known for its libertarian lifestyle for a reason, and forcing people into conformity, as we were talking about earlier, is kind of antithetical to our Alaskan spirit. So appreciate you taking up that fight. And thank you for being with us today, Attorney General Taylor. We appreciate all the fight that you're taking up. This has been Attorney General Taylor with us on stand. We're going to pick up on the other side of the break, me and Nikki, and we wish you all the best this week in Juneau. Treg, we hope that it goes well as you take up the fight with the Juneau legislature.
Thank you, General Taylor, and thank you for the stand that you're taking for the people of Alaska.
No, thank you for letting me get the message out. This is fantastic. If I can give accolades to all the attorneys that work so hard in the Department of Law day in and day out to make sure that we get these things that we need in Alaska. It's any opportunity I can do that, but I don't think that opportunity. So thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely. We'll be back. We'll pick up on the other side of this break. Stand by. Welcome back to Stand. We're on our last segment. You're with Kelly and Nikki Tshibaka. That was an amazing interview we just had with Treg Taylor, our current Attorney General for the state of Alaska. The part of the interview that stood out to me the most, or that had the biggest impact on me, was when he told his story about that big sacrifice he made at the beginning of his journey when he gave up on his lifelong dream to go into the Air Force and instead pivoted and became a lawyer. And in a sense, he followed his dream and has become a fighter for all Alaskans and has actually stood up for all Americans in joining these lawsuits against the Biden administration that are going to continue to play out into the Trump administration's tenure as we set precedent for law across the country. But it was a really hard decision to have to sit there without any cause, but, follow what he really felt like the Lord was telling him to do and walk away from that dream. And we saw how much emotion he has even all these decades later of giving up on a dream like that. How did that affect you?
It was just a really stirring reminder of the importance of courage to follow through on our convictions. And that when we do that, good things happen. It doesn't necessarily mean life is easy, right? But we can lay our heads on our pillows, and our consciences can be at peace about it. And I really appreciated this in particular about it. I appreciated General Taylor's vulnerability, his transparency, and of course the courage he showed in that decision, because we are all benefiting, right, from that decision all these years later. I will not say decades, because General Taylor, you are not that old. But I will say all of these years later, Alaskans are benefiting from the courage of that decision. And in addition to that, when we make those little, in this case it was a big choice, but those decisions to follow our conscience, to follow what we believe we're being led to do, to do what's right, it becomes a pattern in our lives, and eventually becomes our character, and ultimately becomes our destiny. Right?
Yeah.
And I think we heard that in General Taylor's story, because, like you said, he went from he always had that fight in him, right, where he wanted to do something to serve his country, to serve his fellow man. And it was like God just redirected him and said, this is where I want you to go, and this is what I want you to do.
Right.
And he's been doing it ever since. And we just heard about the amazing work that he and the Department of Law have been doing, along with other attorneys general across the country, to not only undo what the Biden administration has done to really unravel the fabric of our democracy in a lot of ways and harm Alaska, but also to take more of a proactive stance. I think going forward with the Trump administration, we have an administration now that is, you can say whatever you think of it, whether you like it or not. One thing you can say about this administration is they are taking incredibly strong, bold, proactive moves to establish the vision that Trump has for America and America's future, and that we all voted him into office to execute.
Those are all hard decisions. I was curious if you had a story about a time you had to make a decision like General Taylor did. I know I have two stories I thought would be interesting to share, and I imagine that you have a story or two as well, having shared life with you. I remember at the beginning of our marriage, I was accepted to Oxford, which at the time had been my lifelong dream, similar to what Treg Taylor shared with us.
Well, I was going to say that was my first major courageous decision, was choosing to ask you to marry me. That took a lot of
Actually,
courage.
that might be a really good story to share.
No, I will not share that publicly yet. Go ahead.
Our engagement
Our
story?
engagement story is
That's
not.
a really great story.
Oh, my goodness.
For another time, maybe.
Yeah.
So having got into the PhD program at Oxford, we faced a decision where we could have been separated for several years while Nikki started his law career and I pursued the PhD, or we could have chosen to do what was best for our marriage. And instead, I made the choice to do what was best for our marriage. And that required laying down this big dream. And the big dream would have been to have had a PhD in theology and got accepted to one of the colleges at Oxford. And that was all in the bag. But then all these years later, as Nikki knows, we ended up planting and pastoring a church, and we've now been doing that for 19 years. And so we have all the benefits that would have come with the seminary degree, but without having sacrificed our marriage. So in the same way that Treg Taylor's story worked out, he ends up fighting for Alaskans or Americans, but in a different way than he thought his path would originally go. And another one that I thought that came to mind was just about how in my first job out of law school, I worked for the Department of Justice, and my boss brought a case to me where he asked me to reinvestigate an investigation that had been done by our Inspector General's office. I was supposed to just edit it and finalize it, make sure it was good for publication. The investigators had looked into allegations that there had been physical abuse by guards at a prison in New York against inmates that had been arrested after September 11th on suspicion that they'd been involved. They hadn't been involved. But they said there had been no abuse, and the Inspector General thought that there were some holes in the case, so he asked me to reinvestigate it. I was just out of law school, and there were some things I thought really needed to be pressed in on, and I just, like you said, Nikki, with that dogged determination that there was just something here that didn't seem right, I ended up really digging into the case and not letting go until I got to the bottom of it, including finding hundreds of videotapes that the heads of the Department of Justice had said had been destroyed, but they hadn't been. And they showed evidence that the guards badly abused these detainees.
Was this the Department of Justice or the Bureau of Prisons that said they were destroyed?
The Department of Justice had said they were destroyed, as well as the Bureau of Prisons, but the BOP is in the Department of Justice. And this case involved the FBI, the DOJ, the BOP, and people even at the head of the Department of Justice. And so it goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court because of what we found in this investigation that I did. And it ends up, I just recently realized it took 20 years for them to resolve and finalize this entire case. Several of the guards ended up getting terminated. Later, one of the prison captain ends up going to jail, and they ended up paying out the detainees over $1 million who were the defendants in the case, or who brought the case. So I thought that was an interesting example as well, just things early in my career of, taking a stand and taking courage and saying, there's something here worth fighting for and not backing down. What's a story you have?
Well, I mean, I don't like to talk about my stories too much. So I'd like to actually, like I said, my biggest one is, and my best and wonderful, most courageous decision was marrying
Most courageous.
Tshibaka.
That was terrifying.
So, and it takes courage every day to walk along this side, this formidable and amazing woman. But I wanted to get back to General Taylor's work as an attorney general. He talked about education. Being an incredibly important thing that's near and dear to his heart, near and dear to the hearts of all of us Alaskans, and of course across the country. Because right now we're seeing a huge sea change and a seismic tectonic shift in how education is being handled now, with the Department of Education effectively, from a practical standpoint, essentially being
dismantled.
Wound down, right? Mm-hmm. Such so that the federal monies can actually be placed in the hands of our state leaders, because we're the ones who know best how to take care of and educate our kids. We have a very diverse system across this country, very diverse communities struggling with different kinds of things. And so to have one size fits all kinds of approaches coming up from the federal government has never been the best way.
And I agree that we will do a better job with determining that if everybody's involved. I'm very concerned about decisions that are being made at the local level in education in Alaska when we have dropped so substantially from ranking pretty high when I was in public school here to now being often number 51 in a United States of 50 states in terms of education scores.
Yeah, no, that's. But what I was really gratified and encouraged to hear was General Taylor's passion for that subject, and seeing what we can do, from a policy standpoint. What are the things that he can do in his position and in working with the governor and working with the Trump administration to really up our game, because we're denying our kids the future that they all deserve to have when we don't meet our basic responsibilities of just teaching them how to read and do math.
Right.
Rather than some of the other, I'm not even going to get into it, but the other things that we seem to have been focusing on, getting back to the basics and the foundations of what are the things that they need to know in order to
Succeed.
flourish, right?
That's right.
For the things needed for human flourishing. And reading and writing and arithmetic has always been at least a basic foundation of that. Leave the values to the parents.
Right.
Focus on the basics of what they need to feed their brains.
I think that's a wonderful example of how well this Attorney General has fought for the values and rights of Alaskans. And I appreciate, like you said, the courage that Treg Taylor has demonstrated in taking on the fight with the Biden administration and the overreach of government in Alaska and on behalf of Alaskans, and in partnering with other attorney generals across the United States in order to protect and preserve the rights of all Americans. We are so grateful that Treg Taylor came on the episode. Thank you, Treg. And we are looking forward to having another amazing episode of Stand. You are with Kelly and Nikki Tshibaka, and we are helping to make courage contagious. You can find all of our episodes at standshow.org, and we will be happy to see you on our next show. Stand by and stand strong and stand firm.